listening to Citizens History, a podcast asking how history can help us navigate the challenges and questions facing us in the United States and the world. This is Season 1, Episode 12, and our topic is something like, is religion essential for the common good? And I'm Podrick Rowan, here with my trusty co-host, J. Matt Ward, and we are delighted to welcome philosophers Rob Manning and Jonathan Miles. We're actually recording in Jonathan's office here in Quincy University on the 16th of April, 2024. And this episode has emerged out of a recent debate that we all had on this exact proposition. Is religion essential for the common good? With Jonathan and I arguing for the proposition, and Rob and J. Matt arguing against. So the philosophers and historians are evenly split. So gentlemen, welcome. We're really happy to have you.
I'm just glad that philosophers get a seat. We get to come to the table with the like everybody else, right? Usually we're the pariahs.
Well, it's true. Historians are the coolest. But it's important for us to reach out to other disciplines and make sure that they know that they are allowed in the common space of dialogue.
You mean I'm one of the cool kids?
Yeah, finally. That's what we worked so hard to get that PhD for.
In a very small pond, you are a very big fish.
Only when you're with philosophers are historians considered the cool kids.
That's probably true.
There's a reason there's a meme online that says, this is the reason why people don't like moral philosophers. And we're both moral philosophers, really, and so that's part of the problem.
By the way, I don't want to get us off track, but I have heard historians and classicists explicitly try to cut down moral philosophers in particular. Is there a running joke about this, or is there a why would moral philosophy in particular have a bad reputation?
Rob, you want to take that?
I don't know. You have Jonathan. You're the moral philosopher. I'm not really.
That's true. You're a Rob. Rob is a continental philosopher. I'm one of these awful analytic philosophers, and that's just an intramural debate. You could go Google it sometime.
No. I'm well aware.
We just have different methods. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I am a moral philosopher. And why is that the case? I think of all of the different branches of philosophy, moral philosophy is the most annoying. The reason it's the most annoying is because it touches on a very ubiquitous, something that is a part of everyday life, that people just want to go through their lives, they want to live their lives, and then people like me come in and start questioning why they make the choices that they make, and they all just look at me and go away. I don't really want to give you a reason why I made this decision here and this decision here, right? I mean, one of my favorite books is a book called How to Be Perfect: The Answer to Every Moral Question. And that is a what's the term I'm looking for? A sarcastic title for a book. And it's written by Michael Schur, the guy who wrote The Good Place. He's the producer of The Good Place. And one of the things that he points out is that people don't want to spend time thinking about why they make the moral choices that they make. They just want to make them. Do I really have to put the shopping cart back in the shopping cart thingy?
Yes.
Do I really have to do that?
Yes.
That's actually the title of a chapter in the book, How to Be Perfect. And of course, if any of you have seen the show The Good Place, spoiler alert.
I haven't seen it.
Great show.
But
great show.
No worries about
one of the main characters dies because she doesn't put the shopping cart thing back, and then a whole bunch of shopping carts hit her and kills her. That's how she dies.
Wow. That's called justice.
That's called justice. There you go. We feel very strongly about these things. when I sort of start questioning them, right? Like I start saying, well, what's your reason? Why is the shopping cart thingy so important, right? And then I start breaking that out and looking at it and trying to make it consistent with like other kinds of decisions. That's when people say, you moral philosophers need to get a life.
Yeah. I've heard it said there's no faster way to make someone angry than ask them to explain themselves.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that people don't like moral philosophers for that reason. But I like you, Jonathan.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And this actually is, I don't know, maybe it's a good place to start, that one of the arguments on the pro side that we made reference to during the debate to say religion actually is essential for the common good is that if most people don't want to examine those foundations, those moral foundations, and to delve into, what is the truth of the matter here? Or even a truth of the matter here?
Or can we be consistent about our choices over time?
Yeah, or if we are not as dedicated as we sometimes think we are to seeking the truth, or to seeking, explanations and good reasons for why we do what we do, then maybe that is one reason why religion would be essential. And I mean religion in the old-fashioned sense, right? Old-time religion, whether Eastern or Western. That people get some of the larger picture, some of the larger questions answered for them. If we're not ready to make the risks and take the risks and make the sacrifices that the truth requires, that's not necessarily a fundamentally bad thing. And as you say, maybe it's just woven into human society that this is just part of what we humans are dealing with when we're trying to make a society. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So religion encourages you to ask the big questions and think about what you should do.
No,
what is the right thing to do?
Quite the I'm not speaking about all religion, but yeah, in this context, in the sense of kind of more conservative religion for normal people, like it answers those questions so that you don't have to delve and risk and seek the truth in the kind of way that might really disturb the apple cart of your life. And it kind of gives you that frame, for better and for worse. I think we can acknowledge, positives and negatives to that.
Don't you see this in Aquinas? I'm gonna reference Thomas Aquinas for just a second. Aquinas talks about he definitely gets into the weeds of moral. He does all this kind of stuff, but he also acknowledges that the average medieval parishioner is just not going. They can't read, much less do that kind of stuff, and so that it better be the case that the church is sort of a package deal of all of those those right sort of moral claims, so that it's a shortcut for that. Well, boy, does that cause all kinds of problems.
Of course, that was a long time ago. Arendt made clear that not thinking is more dangerous than thinking.
And we're talking about Hannah Arendt.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's as 800 years or so almost have passed since Thomas Aquinas' lifetime. But I was having this conversation, I think I might have told you about this, with a neighbor, a guy I grew up across the street from. I went to kindergarten with his daughter, and when I was an adult, he and I would often chop it up, sometimes go out to breakfast together. He's this old-time Catholic. I mean, even more conservative than my parents are.
Like the old Latin Mass Catholic.
Yeah. And I told him, I said, Jim, I never read the Bible, properly read the Bible until I was an adult. I said, there's a lot of strange stuff in the Bible, I said. And he said, read the Bible? No one should read the Bible. The priest reads the Bible and he tells you what's in it. People read the Bible and they start getting all sorts of strange ideas.
They start wanting to nail things on doors, stuff like that.
So it's a minority view, to be sure, even among conservatives these days. But you do find this stuff kicking around, like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You don't, I said, Jim, that's, if that's what you're going for, you're on the right, like, let's just go back, women barefoot and pregnant, let's go back to just an illiterate peasantry and so forth. But in all seriousness, how would we, the lesson still rides. There is still a lesson in Aquinas, despite its problems.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's a remarkably meticulous thinker. Some people think too meticulous, but it's almost for him. I'm not an Aquinas scholar, but I've read a good bit of it, and at least it seems to me that he's kind of like, I'm going to do all of this stuff, right? I'm going to do all the moral thinking. I'm going to try to, get into the weeds of all of these kinds of things. I'm going to do all of that sort of stuff because I have this deep sense that faith and reason are going to interact with each other. I'm not scared to do it. But I have time to do it, and the medieval peasant doesn't have time to do that sort of thing. And the church's, moral stance, its law, all of that sort of stuff becomes sort of the shortcut method of getting to that moral reasoning without sort of thinking about it, right?
I'm wondering, a lot of folks would say, well, actually, and this is like the post-liberal philosophers kind of saying, look, Thomas Aquinas was the beginning of modernity, and that is a bad thing. That Thomas Aquinas splits faith and reason. He tries to make the two distinct, and that's, according to them, the pickle that we find ourselves in.
Which is ironic because, to reference another podcast, just recently I was listening to The Rest Is History podcast with Tom Holland, not that one, the other one, the historian, and Dominic Sandhurst, and they did this 5-part sweeping thing on the life of Martin Luther. And Luther hated Aquinas. I mean, with all the fervor of his fart jokes and all the other stuff that Luther was famous for, right? And the fact that, one of the things that Tom Holland points out is that the Reformation has implications far beyond religion, right? The idea of reason, the idea of the Enlightenment. He sort of draws some lines from the Reformation into all of these other areas, and Zwingli and all of the other people, and hated Aquinas. Because it was sort of, you just have to take this is the doctor of the faith, like whatever. And you're saying, it's interesting to me that you're saying that there is this critique that these two things are, that Aquinas is the first one to sort of separate these two things or maybe put them in houses, right? Like the top tier, the middle tier, and the bottom, the bottom floor or whatever.
Well, Luther hates Aquinas because Luther has a much darker view of human nature. And with Aquinas, I understand the aspect of Aquinas that you're talking about, but Aquinas also has the notion that the divine light shines in everyone.
Yeah.
Not just Christians, but everyone.
There's a common grace, right?
So, Aquinas emerges because he's a Dominican, and he has this mendicant spirituality, which is a radicalization of the notion that all humans are made in the image of God. Here's how he radicalizes that. So you don't have to be from a particular religion to have the divine light shine in you and help you sort out moral questions. This is a beautiful aspect of...
This is the Summa Contra Gentiles, isn't it?
Yeah,
this is where...
It's a beautiful aspect of the Aquinas, and not just Aquinas, but the entire mendicant heritage.
Yeah, the Dominican orders. Yeah, the engaging with Islam that happens in the Summa Contra Gentiles. Like, here are the things we agree on, right? Like, they're up here, right? Like, now let's look at where the disagreements are and that sort of thing.
Philosophically, this question about whether religion is necessary for the common good, two partners, interesting conversation partners that are a little bit more contemporary than Aquinas would be Kant and Hume, because Kant, with this notion of the crooked timber of humanity, Kant seemed to have more of a faith that the religious traditions, particularly Christianity, but also to a certain extent Judaism, were useful for humans in this process of becoming a good person. Whereas, Hume looked at religion with complete skepticism and said that whenever he found out that anybody was religious, he automatically assumed that they were a scoundrel. And that they were just following precepts that somehow made them a better person because they believed a certain thing and had no actual commitment to actually being a good person, because they didn't need to, because they were in the in group. They were Orthodox Jew, or they were a saved Christian, and so this is Hume's take on our question.
Automatically a scoundrel.
Not
automatically an idiot. But
not
automatically
idiot,
a scoundrel.
Automatically
So there's a deep kind of bad faith going on here. There's a kind of, is it a lying to themselves, or is it just a pure dissembling and lying to others?
Well, you get an image of and maybe a shadow of what will come, because if you are a member of a religious community, you are the in group, and you are, you're fine, and you're saved because you're in the ark. You're in that in group, and you're in the ark. Which is interesting. That famous metaphor of the ark. Levinas talks about this in a Talmudic read. In the Talmud, they talk about who shuts the door.
Yeah.
And they say that no human can shut the door. No human can shut the door to each other. Only God shuts the door to the ark. But religion is often a matter of shutting the door to the other person and other group of people. That's part and parcel of what it is to be in a religion. Mm-hmm. And this is what I was saying the other night. Why I come, even though I am a religious person myself, and I have a lot of respect for lots of forms of religiosity, I still, as a lot of the Franciscans would in Quincy University, I think, I am on the other side of this. I don't think it is right at all, historically grounded, phenomenologically grounded, to make some argument that religion is essential to the common good is an insult to humanity. And it's not true in terms of just recent history. So.
Can I ask, what does it take to be religious? Do you have to believe in God to be religious, or do you just have to accept some sort of communal harmony with other human beings and believe that harmony makes a rising tide lifts all boats, so to speak? Like there's some sort of internal human spirit that we can...
Well, this is one of the things that we got into in the debate, right? Was like, well, what do we mean by religion, right? And we wanted somehow our idea of religion to include Buddhism. Yeah. And you just said, do you have to believe in God? Buddhism is not a deified religion. Would you agree?
No, not in its origin. I mean, it becomes that way in lots of manifestations across cultures and centuries, but certainly in its origin, Theravada is definitely not theistic tradition.
Right.
I mean, our idea of religion, whether we find ourselves on a pro or anti-religious side in the West, is our idea about religion is extremely idiosyncratic and frankly weird by any world historical standard.
So you would say no?
No,
if you say yes, and I know a lot of people that would, especially many of the deeply conservative Protestants that I grew up with, they would say you have to believe in God to be religious, and it has to be our God.
Right.
That's the next question.
Otherwise, you're not religious?
No, otherwise, you're not saved.
Oh, yeah, true.
You could
but
be religious, I suppose.
Yeah, you could. I mean, we're not equating. I mean, like, you know as well as I do. For reference, J. Matt and I grew up in exactly the same town.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
It's just weird.
It's not even a big town.
No.
It's what?
7,000, 8,000 people.
8,000 people, right? Wow. And we both somehow ended up here. I got here first, and then J. Matt came later. And we found this out, and it was just weird. But you know as well as I do that if you were to talk to most of the people in the churches in the town that we grew up in, religion itself is almost a dirty word, right? Like religion is that, you know, that's what those Catholics do,
I suppose.
Interesting.
Right?
Now, there's a formalism to a certain kind of religion that is the opposite of.
Jesus hated religion. This is the vent. I'm
the conceit.
I'm channeling. I'm not.
Yeah.
Jesus hated religion. He hated, you know, the Pharisaic religion. He hated all this sort of religious practice and all this kind of stuff, and tried to flout it every time he did, because what really matters is a personal relationship. You know, like that's the kind of the idea. But so
even though they're part of this very powerful evangelical, is it fair to say, force, they don't see themselves as part of organized religion at all. They would say organized religion is kind of a dirty word.
It's a sleight of hand, I think. Correct me if you have a different perspective, but this is more of a modern interpretation of religion. I feel like this started when I was a kid. People started this really cool thing of like, I believe in Jesus, or I have a personal relationship. I'm not religious. What I have is much deeper than that.
Correct.
And I don't just follow a bunch of like rules and standards. I actually have a personal relationship. And so it's people who make this distinction are not serious philosophers, I don't think. I think they're just people that are following a certain trend that is developed with, you know, turning the lights down low in church and playing with acoustic guitars and electric guitars. And they're like, this isn't religion, this is a relationship. I heard that phrase all the time when I was a kid.
Well, kind of the equivalent of I'm spiritual but not religious on the left. On the left.
Well, as beautiful as that is, we still have to consider that a form of religiosity.
Certainly. I think from an academic perspective, I would agree.
Absolutely.
I think from any honest perspective, like, come on. And
that's the reason why I didn't want to equate saved with religious,
certainly.
Right? Like, that's the reason.
What I was going to follow that up with is, don't you think there are some deeply conservative Christians who would say that Muslims aren't religious? They claim to be, but because they don't believe in the right God, they can't have that correct religious relationship.
Yeah, see, that's
a lot of Christians I've heard called anyone who's not a Christian is an atheist. I have heard,
really,
and specifically with Muslims, it is, and it's frankly silly on its face, partly because, well, the monotheistic religions and you find this on the Muslim and on the Christian side of things, they nowadays think that they believe in different gods, and they, you know, even if a Muslim is speaking in English, sometimes that Muslim will insist on saying Allah rather than God.
Yeah.
And okay, I get it, but historically speaking, these are the same God. Like this is the reason why Muslim societies accorded such privileges and rights to Christians and Jews and even Zoroastrians, because they were all people of the book. Even though you were of a different faith or a different sect or whatever you want to call it, you still had that belief in the one God.
So you could say something like the Abrahamic religion.
Exactly. Probably the best way to talk about it, The Abrahamic faiths,
Okay. Well, I think that clears things up a bit more for me, especially where you're coming from. If you don't have to believe in God to be religious, then that's a big open field.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, John Gray...
But we wanted to work... We didn't want to include in our definition, like, people who go about being committed to something religiously, like we're using the adverb, like, you know, they're meticulous, they have practices, you know, like, for example, one of the things that we dealt with in the debate was, we want our definition of religion to include Buddhism, I think, but leave out communism.
Now, I would dissent from that, but I see where you're going. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, there are communists especially shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. And I was telling J-Matt about this. I remember reading, and I don't know where, and maybe you know where it is because you know more about the early Bolshevism than I could ever know. There was a letter written from a communist to his girlfriend or sweetheart, whoever it is, essentially saying, I'm leaving you for my religion. And my religion is communism.
Sure.
And he talks about it in religious terms.
Of course.
Right? He talks about those things in religious terms. And he doesn't believe in God.
No, but this is what Tillich is trying to open up for us, and it will always be associated with the master name of Paul Tillich. Religion is the form of culture, and culture is the substance of religion. Like religion is the ultimate concern of the culture. So, you could say that what's the religious dimension of American culture is definitely its materialism, because we worship. How would we end up with a president like Trump if we didn't worship money? So that is our religion. Now in approaching this question, do we want to have a definition of religion that embraces what Tillich is trying to say, and really broaden religion and forms of religion to...
Would Tillich include communism as a religion?
Oh, absolutely. Communism is a religion. So is Nazism. I mean, he understood it from his own experiences in Germany before he left. Of course, there's a religious dimension to Nazism.
Well, see, the worry I have is if we expand that definition that much,
well, yeah,
right, then the common good becomes way, I think, easier to argue for.
This is true. I would agree. That's one of the reasons I'm on the pro side. But we have to take religion as widely as we can. Part of the problem, I think, is whether it's, evangelicals in Mississippi or New Age folks in where I'm from in Berkeley, people will say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious. Oh, this is a relationship with Jesus. This isn't religion. Mm-hmm. Or just a straight up materialist will say, well, I have zero connection to religion. I have zero use for it. I am a part of the Enlightenment project, and religion is part of a backward past. In all of these cases, you've got, with very deep respect and humility for my philosopher friends, it's like this philosopher's error. And please, I really want to hear what you think about this. It's like this classic philosopher's error where somebody makes an outrageous statement, and then they say, but I'm going to redefine my terms to suit, and then by the time you finish redefining your terms, it sounds all perfectly reasonable, and then you say, well, yeah, that's it. Like with qualia, or with, I'm sure you have at your fingertips numerous contemporary philosophical dilemmas in which a word has been repurposed from ordinary use, redefined, and then redeployed. And if we do this with religion, it's like we're getting further and further away. And this isn't just a problem of academics, but it is also, I think it's more incumbent on us to take religion in its wider world historical frame, rather than just because there are all sorts of people who call themselves atheists up and down, but who, as Tillich is saying, are in many important ways religious, and trying to define ourselves away from that, and trying to say, that's the bad stuff, but I'm over here, I'm the good one. Whether it's a relationship with Jesus, or a spiritual but not religious, or an out-and-out materialist atheist who says, I'm not religious. I'm not saying, yes, you are. I'm saying the terms you are using are kind of involving you in difficulties that you're not even aware of. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Can I piggyback on that? I was looking up something else, but I found something that I think might play into that. One of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, Patrice Cullors, or maybe it's Cullors, I'm not sure. says that Black Lives Matter is a spiritual movement, and that lifting up the names of the victims, they often chant like George Floyd or something,
Right.
is literally almost resurrecting a spirit so they can work through us. Would you agree with that? That's some sort of... Is Black Lives Matter a religion? Is it a religious behavior?
Well, Black Lives Matter is a product of the strength of the black church. I mean,
I certainly wouldn't ever wag my finger at a sentiment like that. That's their kind of... What is it like? Is that a mission statement? Is that a...
No, that's just a statement from the founder in an interview. But
absolutely. I think it does go straight to the heart of
what saying. That just, and I'm eager for your take, Jonathan, doesn't rhyme with the conservative values that I grew up with. And you had to follow certain rules that were set out in a sacred text by an almighty creator. And if you stray from those rules, you're not saved, and are you even religious? So I think if we're going to answer the question, is religion necessary for the common good, there's a lot of people right from the get-go who aren't going to agree with you when you define religion that broadly. I'm not saying I agree with those people.
No,
I'm just saying that...
It's an important thing to grapple with, absolutely. I mean, I would say that there's a... Whether... One of the distinctions we kind of laid out in the debate was, okay, there is a... Among more or less progressive people, and maybe it would be better to say liberal people, I don't know, you'd have two different opposing camps, right? One is the Karen Armstrong, Dalai Lama camp, the folks who say, look, religion properly understood is peaceful. Religion properly understood is not even dogmatic, and it's something that helps people to live their lives amidst the malignant modernity, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of the camps that you would find. And then on the other side, you would have, the mainline materialists, the atheists, the Steven Pinkers, the Christopher Hitchens of the world, all the new atheists, in which they say, look, religion, properly understood, is a backward idiocy, and the sooner we get rid of it, the better. It has nothing to do with science, nothing to do with anything that we might call modern. And the problem is that both of those camps are insufficiently pluralist. They are...
Yes, they
both.
are.
They're treating, they don't agree on the definition of religion, first of all. They don't agree on their definition, so they're kind of just talking past each other. Kind of this sterile, what many people call the God debate. And they're treating conservative forms of religion with disdain and contempt. And maybe that contempt is in some ways deserved, but I just wanted to point that out.
Well, insufficiently pluralist, but I would be much stronger than that. They're actually forms of blindness, because you have to be pretty freaking blind not to see that there's a lot of good that comes out of religion. There's a lot of strong positives that come out of forms of religion.
Yeah,
and there
absolutely.
are also a lot of negatives that come out of various forms of religion. So I took a more phenomenological approach. It's not one religion; it's various forms of religion. And it might be helpful to distinguish between strong forms and weak forms. And who is this Italian philosopher? And I've been sitting here trying to remember his name. A contemporary Italian philosopher who talks about weak thought. So there's and he considers himself a religious person in sort of a minimalist sense, non-dogmatic, and he's developed this concept of weak thought.
Would this be like the 60s or?
No. He's very much alive.
Oh, very much.
He's a contemporary Derrida, and I'm sitting here forgetting. He's Italian.
Gramsci?
He's Italian, and I forget. But he's.
Yeah.
But the difference between strong forms of religiosity and weak forms of religiosity.
I was trying to get, Rob comes at it as a phenomenologist. I came at it as, sort of an example of sort of conceptual analysis. I started thinking to myself, Rob's smiling because this is very analytic philosophy kind of thing to do. I need the necessary and sufficient conditions for religion. Right? I need the necessary conditions, the things that we have to have, that without them it's not religion. And then the sufficient conditions, once we have those, we have a religion, and then that allows me to sort of start sorting them out. And the best that I came up with in the weeks prior to the debate was, I think religion involves both belief and practice. I think you can have practice without belief, and that would look like religion, right? Without any sort of particular beliefs about, and by belief, I mean belief in something that's not scientifically verifiable. We're getting close to God here, but we're not quite there, right? I think this would include Tillich's idea of the absolute. Am I getting Tillich right? What did Tillich call God? There was a term
ultimate
for
concern.
The ultimate concern, right?
The culture's ultimate concern, whatever that is it's the religious dimension of it.
Right. And then it also has, so it has to have a belief about the nature of reality, right? Like, this is the way reality actually is, right? And then it also has to have practices, because you could just have the beliefs without any kind of practices at all, and that would be something like, I don't know, Bertrand Russell, right? Like, he has in A Free Man's Worship, this essay that Russell wrote about, as an atheist, about religion. And he says, look, we're nothing but a random collocation of atoms on a sea of nothingness, right? That's what we are. Okay, that's my belief. Now, what does that mean in practice, right? Like, what do I do? What are my practices, right? Penn Jillette, the magician, also very strong atheist, points out that every Sunday is a holiday for an atheist, right? Like, you can do whatever you want, And one of the points that I tried to make in the debate was that nothing follows from atheistic belief, right? Like, no particular moral view follows from it. Now, people tried to pin me down and say that you can't have moral belief without belief in God, and I don't think that's true. I've done enough moral philosophy to know that that's not true, and I tried to talk about social contract theory and lots of other things where it might look very different than what we consider sort of moral reasoning, but you could still have it. I'm just saying that if atheism is true, nothing morally necessarily follows from that. Doesn't mean all atheists are evil and hate people. No. I mean, nothing follows from it morally. From the fact that we're a random collocation of atoms on a sea of nothingness, right? Like on a sea of non-existence.
Now, I'm not clear. Are we accepting that as a fact? The random collocation bit?
Oh, no. That was just Russell's sort of belief.
Yeah, but
right?
Russell was an extremely moral person, took many brave stands, and is a great example.
He absolutely was.
A philosopher actually, did great moral things and took brave moral stands.
He did.
As opposed to, of course, the great example of sort of a philosopher with a very mystical bent, who's certainly religious in some ways, but became a Nazi and supported the Nazi Party for the entire existence, and that is, of course, Heidegger.
Heidegger.
So,
Yeah.
So if you want to contrast somebody with a religious bent versus somebody who has no religious bent whatsoever, but still was a great moral example.
Yeah, and I want to be clear.
Right.
I'm not saying that's inconsistent.
Yeah,
it's not inconsistent.
You're saying that from an atheistic stance, there's no moral
particular either one way or the other.
No, it doesn't lead one way or the other. No.
Yeah.
So, if I understand you right, you would acknowledge that yes, there are religious folks who are going to cave when the chips are down, who are not going to make courageous moral choices, and the opposite.
And that can be explained by some religious practice. I mean, like, some religious ideas about reality can explain that. That's why Luther had such a dim view of human nature.
Absolutely, yeah.
He lived in that part of Germany.
I mean, his dim view of human nature was probably the most, I think, coherent part of his thought. Like, you can be religious and make courageous moral choices. You can be religious and be a moral weakling. Same with atheists, right? I think we would acknowledge this, that we're not saying that one side is making better moral choices than another. But even more than that, what you just said, Rob, about the wider definition of religion, that would include a person like Bertrand Russell, right? Now, I'm not trying to say, well, he was really religious. I'm just saying, don't we have to question that?
A wider definition of religion could include that, yes. I'm not saying that I am necessarily articulating that. I think I don't think we should widen it so that everything gets included in religion. I wouldn't even necessarily take it in a Talikian direction for this talk about whether religion is essential for the common good. And while we're on Luther, we shouldn't forget that he encouraged people to go and burn down the house of their Jewish neighbors. Yep. So, his form of religiosity, although it's admirable in many ways, also led to hatred and violence.
Yep.
So,
and was used very strongly for anti-Semitism by the Nazis, right? Like they plowed.
Well, they certainly were able to draw upon those late Luther sources. Yes, that these people should not be living among us. So. Which is just an example of, there are a lot of positives associated with religion and religious behavior and religious beliefs, but there are also a lot of negatives.
I tried to sum that up by the statement from Jonathan Haidt. Do you know him? Mm-hmm. He's Jewish. He wrote a book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Disagree About Religion and Politics. And this is a whole spate of sort of positive psychology books like Joshua Green's Moral Tribes and these others. And he made the statement that religion binds and blinds.
Yeah.
That is, it binds people together, right? Like almost magnetically. But it also causes all of the worst part of our biases to the in group and the out group. And one of my favorite essays ever on the internet is by the
Pseudodionysus?
No. I'm not going back that far.
Okay.
It's a pseudonym, but the guy's name is Scott Alexander, and there's this great essay called "I Can Tolerate Anything But the Out Group."
Yes.
Where he sort of admits, he sort of confesses, as his sort of liberal, kind of culturally Jewish sort of position, that there's like a whole different world that is like a parallel universe that he never touches and never has anything to do with, and he can tolerate, really it's sort of a confessional kind of idea. And that it's very easy to love people in the in group. It's very hard to love people in the out group.
Well, we had a rather poignant and terrible example of that when we did our lunch discussion about Israel-Palestine, and the one Palestinian student, speaking from a lot of suffering of his family, there's no doubt about that, but he was saying that things are so desperate for the Palestinians that their consolation is the Quran, and he whipped out his phone and read us the passage where in the Quran it basically says that things will be okay for the Jews for a while, but Allah will eventually wipe them all out. And that is, that's where we are. We know that's going to happen because it's in the Quran, so this is what we're waiting for. Things are so desperate that all we can do is wait for that.
I need to look more deeply into that, because I did look up that passage in the Quran that he cited.
And it's pretty consistent with Hamas's own.
Ambiguous,
isn't it? I mean, it's pretty consistent with Hamas's own.
There are plenty of references to the generosity, to the kindness, to the mercy of Allah in the Quran.
Sure.
But that's.
And the Jews in early Islam had a protected place.
Yeah.
So I mean, this. I certainly will not attempt to glom onto or convince anyone of a particular definition, even as expansive as I'd like, of religion. But when a person like Christopher Hitchens, the staunch atheist, no religion at all in my life, when he lays at the doorstep of religion, even the totalitarian horrors of Stalin and Hitler, right? He says even that is ultimately religious at its root. Aren't we going too far in the other direction? Like,
maybe he's read Tillich. Is he coming at it from a Tillichian? I mean, is he taking?
I don't think he's as learned as that, but he's not.
I think he hates communism and he hates religion, and he has a hard time keeping the two apart.
Well, here's the thing. Remember, Hitchens was a Trotskyite at the beginning, and anytime he never used the term communism in a negative way. Yeah. He always said Stalinism when he meant when most people would say communism. But it's not just Hitchens. This isn't a one-off. John Gray, the atheist philosopher, he would also say something very similar. Yep. That this is, in fact, that atheism, modern atheism anyway, is in fact a religious manifestation. And then, Rob, you mentioned that thinking that religion, the terms of the debate, right? Religion is necessary for the common good. You said very pithily that this isn't like to think this is kind of an insult to humanity, right?
Yes, indeed.
How would you square that?
Humans can have they can have good without religion. Is that the idea you're trying to get across?
Well, of course they can have good without religion. Right. They have reason. They also have, like, maybe Kant is saying this too. Humans are drawn to think in terms of right and wrong and to care about such things.
And that was Kant's whole project. I mean, one of the most interesting. Kant's interesting. Rob and I have gone back and forth a little bit about Kant because we read Kant a little bit differently. But I try to get across to my students that Kant thinks you can have morality and get everything, an absolute morality, even to the point of not lying to save a life, just from reason, right? But he also says, nevertheless, when I look at the starry heavens above and the moral law within, I must conclude there is a God. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which was just kind of this epitaph at the end, right? Like at the end of his book on morals. So, I mean, that's a really interesting. So you have someone who really does believe in God, but also thinks that you don't need God for any kind of societal good. You have reason that can do that.
Yes.
I think that's the point you're trying to make, right?
Well, and Kant also says, there are equally valid reasons for God and equally valid reasons against them. So, you could call that a weak position. I don't think you get a very strong position in terms of the God question in Kant. Maybe
I always wondered why he felt the need to say that.
Yeah.
I often wonder, is it just he's worried about pitchforks and torches, or did he really feel the need to say that? I'm not suggesting he didn't believe it.
It sounds sincere. I don't know. Why would he have felt that he would need to lie?
Well,
dissemble.
With Kant, you also have to think about what was allowed to be said at that point in time.
Right. So it is pitchforks and torches.
It is. I mean, well, it's getting
even
it
for
through.
Someone of his stature.
It's getting. Oh, absolutely.
So he's
especially when he writes on the religious question,
right?
And then of course Hume wrote the dialogues and probably finished it by 1751 or so. But then he circulated among his friends, and they said, "Oh, no way," and it wasn't published until after he was dead. He put it in his will, so it wasn't published until 1776.
Wow. Yeah, it reminds me of Descartes from. I had always associated this with the early modern age.
The 1776 is important because that's when he died.
It was a couple years after, or maybe it was 1778. I mean, it was published by his nephew a couple years after he.
After his death. I think he died in
1776. It was in his will, so. But it just put an emphasis on how controversial these things were at the time, and any type of argument that cast doubt on theistic belief.
So you don't think that Kant really actually believed that? He just stuck it in there?
Oh, I don't.
Or maybe
what
he didn't
Kant
think about it that
actually,
much.
what Kant actually believed. I mean, I certainly take him at his word that the natural world gives us all kinds of reasons to wonder about the wonder of what might be beyond us. So.
Yeah, I mean, if it was dissembling, it was quite an artful and poetic dissembling.
Oh, it's worse in German.
Well, Kant had faith in the religious traditions to help mold the ethical character. Not that it was absolutely necessary. Humans can do that on their own, but he definitely had a fairly high opinion of the religion's ability to help people have ethical boundaries.
Yeah, in some ways it's very parallel to von Humboldt in that regard. There's another word for viewers, listeners to Google. Von Humboldt had this sort of, he didn't believe in religion. He was a lot like, John Stuart Mill quotes him, with reverence. He didn't didn't believe these things, but he really thought that religion had a positive effect in society. He really thought it was maybe not a necessary, but he might have thought that if we had sufficient enough religiosity, and he would probably have said, pure religiosity, the right kind of religiosity, then we might have the common good.
So, on that note, tying back what we were talking about with moral philosophy and why moral philosophers are hated, with this point you're making about reason and the necessity of reason, and indeed the sufficiency of reason to be kind of to mold our characters, to create ethical codes, moral outlooks on life that don't need religion in any kind of narrow sense at all. If most people don't want to justify, maybe they're not capable of justifying, like in the way that a moral philosopher will poke them, right? Well, why did you do that? Why didn't you do the other thing? What's going on there? Justify that. Explain that to me. Like, if most people don't want to do that, don't like being on the hot seat like that, and perhaps aren't even capable, then what role could religion really play? What role could reason really play for those folks?
Rob,
how do you get
first?
with
I have
reason
an answer,
to the place that you're talking about with folks
religion, reason is still playing a role. When I think about whether I should return that cart, or whether I have any obligations to other people, or whether I should be kind to this person who's a complete stranger, reason is still playing a role. And you don't have to have a religious tradition to incite those questions in you.
But that's, I know you're not just talking about philosophers and intellectual types. Like, you would say that this carries as well for just an ordinary person who may not be that educated, given the resistance that Jonathan's pointed to. And I don't want to justify I don't want to think about that. I prefer that you, moral philosopher, get out of my face with all of these questions.
Well, you could still have. You're still using your reason to actually formulate what you want to do.
Well, you've hit upon a subject near and dear to my heart right now, because people may be surprised that moral philosophers have projects. Like we're actually we sit in a room and somebody's like, "What are you doing?" I'm thinking. What is that? Is that hard work? Oh, you better believe it is. Because I'm very interested right now in the question of why and how people change their minds about something. And in particular, what role reason plays in that. Which has led me to a whole lot of social psychology. Like people like Jonathan Haidt, Hugo Mercier, some of these people. And in a very recent book, I don't know if Hugo is right about this, right? But in a very recent book called The Enigma of Reason, Mercier and his colleague, who, forgive me, I can't remember his name, in The Enigma of Reason are arguing that reason has evolved as a particular kind of way of persuading people within the in-group and justifying our treatment of those in the out-group. And one of the biggest things that I got from, for example, a book that I know J-Matt has read along with me, because I recommended it to you and you grabbed it and read it, a book called How Minds Change, is that people will not, that reason and logic really do have a place, but in what we believe, but how strongly we believe something is affective, it's emotive. And we will not change our beliefs as long as I think it is your reasons. The only way that persuasion actually happens is when whatever reasons you're giving me, I adopt as my own reasons. When I adopt them as my own reasons, then I feel comfortable enough to say that I believe in them. So the what happens in moral discourse, you said, well, what good is any of this if people just don't want to delve into it? They don't want to delve into it until they run into somebody who disagrees with them. And then we have a question of, I can either, to be just absolutely economic about it, I can bribe you, I can take the Doug North position and just like figure out how much it would take to get you to just do what I want you to do, right? Or I can persuade you, or I can force you, right? And the entire liberal project has been, how do we live alongside each other, persuading each other when we need to, and hopefully not beating each other over the head to make each other do things. But the problem with that comes when the way that we use reason, now I'm just pontificating, but we use reason to reinforce the beliefs that we have, and within the in-group, we use it to persuade each other, right? And with the out-group, we use reason to get them to see that my reasons should be your reasons, and then that then translates into strength of belief. If that makes sense.
It does.
Sure.
It does.
That's the social psychology stuff that I'm really interested in right now. Like this just gets me excited.
Well, the Catholic Church has just done that a couple weeks ago. They came out with a long-awaited document about a number of things, but transgender, and has decreed that it's a violation of God's original creation of male and female, and that you are making yourself God if you change your gender. So it's come out with a very strong stance against the phenomenon of
and it also condemned surrogacy.
And it's
as well.
condemned surrogacy, and
yet
people who are taught that, who believe in that, when they actually encounter a transgender person or a couple that are struggling to have their own child, they might actually have an experience within themselves of an overflowing of compassion that actually sort of undoes the reason of that doctrinal stance.
Well, I think
so we might call that moral sentiment. I'm not exactly sure, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that in human experience these things happen. I mean,
it's very true.
And hopefully
we saw this in Alabama with the case with the embryos, right? Like the Alabama Supreme Court just interpreted the law that was in Alabama. This is the law you guys came up with in your legislature all those years ago. We're saying we can't find any reason why this wouldn't apply to embryos, So you guys go do what you gotta,
Right.
You asked us. We're not here to overturn diddly squat. I hated the news media was like, the Alabama Supreme Court overturned. No. They just, you gave us the law. We interpreted it, and it's there's no, you don't like it, go write a different law. And within 2 weeks, that's exactly what Alabama did. Why?
Yes.
Because there were way too many people in Alabama that calling the giving the full moral status to an embryo, and that in and of itself is not the biggest issue. It's allowing wrongful death suits over the destruction of embryos that threatened the in vitro fertilization industry.
Sure.
And there are way too many people in the Alabama court. Like, they want to look tough to their constituents or whatever. But when they start getting 60 or 70 calls from people who are donors and saying, look, we did IVF.
And it created
you better find a way
and we
to
love our
reason
children
around.
through that.
And we love our children through that. What happened? The Alabama legislature actually did their job. They actually changed the law, right? Now, it remains to be seen whether they will actually, get hit at the election. We'll find out. But they wanted the court to do it, right? And when the court did it, then it's like, because then, see, if the court does it, then I can blame the court, right? Not me, it's the court that did it. When the court said, yep, you don't like it, change your law, and then they started out all of that pressure from people who are just going, look, I don't know about whether embryos are persons or not, but what I do know is I want IVF. I need IVF, and you better have a really good reason why the IVF isn't true. And if you're going to give me some sort of like shortcut religious umbrella idea, it ain't going to cut it, right? You're going to have to give me something more than that. And IVF almost always destroys embryos. I mean, otherwise you end up with Octomom,
Of course.
Those kinds of things. Yeah. So you better find out something to do differently. And the Alabama Supreme Court did that.
Yes, they did.
Sorry, I'm a bioethicist, so this is like I wrote all about this.
Well, the Supreme Court just ruled that Idaho's law against transgender youth is constitutional and can stay in place. So, will the Supreme Court take a case if a state tries to outlaw transgender altogether?
We'll see.
Will
but all of this
the
is
state
moral
will probably
reasoning
try
that
to
goes
do
on
that.
with your neighbor.
Yeah,
all of this is the moral reasoning that goes on with your neighbor. So we don't want somebody telling us not that we have to put the card up or we don't have to put the card up, right? Like the in the shopping cart thing. But boy, when it comes to these sorts of things, right? What are our choices? War, bribery, or persuasion? And it'll be moral persuasion.
So, with persuasion, reason is a tool that we can use most effectively with the in-group, but sometimes very selectively with the out-group.
As long as we can, in some sort of affective way, I can get you to see my reasons as your reasons.
Right.
And sometimes that happens when, through Socratic dialogue, this is one of the things our moderator, Neil Wright, was talking about. What this happens in Socratic dialogue a little shiftily, because by you, through a series of questions, getting to the point where you have no choice but to go this way or whatever, then it starts to feel like, and that's the key idea, it feels like you came to that conclusion on your own. I didn't make you come to that conclusion.
Right.
I think this is something that, is it McRaney who wrote that book, How Minds Change?
David McRaney.
David McRaney, that really struck me. He says that and correct me if I'm wrong, most people believe things not necessarily because they believe them, because they're surrounded by a community of people who also believe those same things. So if you ask them to change their minds, the reason why they're so resistant is oftentimes they have to surrender the social relationships they have that are connected with whatever they believe. So all my life I've been told, don't put away the shopping cart, and now you're telling me I have to, but that means my grandmother won't like me anymore, my parents will disagree with me, and so people won't change their mind, whether they understand this consciously or not, because they're connected to a much larger, like, social atmosphere of...
That's why I find, like, religious conversions from one religion to another fascinating.
Yeah.
And McGraney talks about this with the Shepherd's Child. What is the people who like to protest at funerals and everything.
The Westboro Baptist Church.
Westboro Baptist Church. They're about Baptists the same way Taco Bell is Mexican. They, you know, he tells the story about the brother and the sister who the Westboro Baptist Church is a cult of one family.
Yeah, basically.
And of lawyers, and the brother and sister left the organization. They left the whole thing. But it took a long time. But it started with a Twitter debate with someone whom she eventually married. The person that started the Twitter debate with her. And he approached her very Socratically, very, and there was a point where she was like, the only reason I'm still believing this stuff is because I don't want to face the consequences. And when the situation was allowed her to leave without a direct confrontation, she was gone. And so was her brother shortly thereafter.
So reason being less a truth-seeking thing than it helps us to bind ourselves, as you say, blind and bind.
Yep.
Now,
and she wasn't going to leave until she had another community to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not too weird, right?
It's not weird at all. It's completely.
Who was it? Kuhn talks about science like this, right? Like, people are not scientists. Like the most supposedly rational people you could possibly ever meet. Karl Popper says that science works on falsification, right? Like, we're looking to falsify our hypothesis. And then along comes Thomas Kuhn and says, no, that's not how scientists actually work. They don't give up on a theory until they have another theory to land in, another community to land in. It's probably not that much different, scientific belief and religious belief or political belief or anything else, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is why our modern kind of modern boundaries of religion that most of us insist on are so inadequate to capture what's going on here.
I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but it would be fun to talk about, what causes people to change their political beliefs. I think political beliefs and religious beliefs have so much in common.
Yes, they do.
And what would it, what did it, for me, I know what it did that took me to bid goodbye to the party that I grew up in, with my family, with everybody. I mean, I know exactly what it took to do that. And it was Guantanamo Bay. I mean, it's like I heard all these arguments for the ends justify the means during the war on terror, right? And
so you supported the invasion. You were a mainline Republican.
I grew up. I mean, I'll tell you exactly how
I was the same way.
Yeah, and when I saw, I just couldn't turn away from what was going on in Guantanamo Bay, even though I didn't like those people. They're bad, But I was doing a political talk show at the time, and we were talking about whether waterboarding is torture. Of course it's torture. And I could make arguments for it, but I'm not going to right now, right? And there was a point...
Enhanced interrogation.
Yeah, we got to get the terminology right. I mean, enhanced interrogation is right.
It can't be torture if somebody would volunteer to do it to show that it's not torture, okay? This is why moral reasoning is important, right? And I just, all I heard from people was the end justifies means, and I've done enough moral philosophy to know that that's the worst parts of utilitarianism, right? We'll push the fat man onto the track to, if you go Google the trolley problem and you'll know what I'm talking about.
It's all over Twitter all the time.
Yeah, it's all over Twitter. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I mean, even as a Christian, I was hearing, the end doesn't justify the means. We're not consequentialists. We're not all these things. And then all of a sudden, all of those people are suddenly being consequentialists because the stakes are high enough? Nope. And it, but I didn't jump ship until I had another community to be part of.
What was that community?
This is I was in graduate school, and I got a fellowship with the Institute for Humane Studies. And the Institute for Humane Studies is a pretty wide tent libertarian think tank. And so before I accepted all of that, I had to think about whether or not I was, if that's where I was. And that led to a whole kind of sea change about my view about government and all of those kinds of things, of what is the role of government, especially because I wasn't giving up my religion, right? So I had to find a way for those two things to fit together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that can either be rationalization or that can be an exercise in reason, one of the two. I mean, Kant did the same thing with modern physics, right? Modern physics sort of threw him into a tailspin at one point, right? Like the whole concept of Principia Mathematica, Newton's physics, kind of threw Kant into a whirlwind at one point. And there was a time when Kant hadn't sort of gone the way that he was going to go with his metaphysics, right? And he had abandoned what he called his dogmatics, his dogmatism. And I love the way Etienne Gilson puts it. Nobody knows how long he stayed in that blessed state, right? Of doing that. And but I was there. I was at that state, and I had to figure out what I was going to accept in this new community and what I wasn't going to accept. And that involved a lot of probing and a lot of people saying, well, you're not a true libertarian, and all that kind of stuff, everything.
Well, you were sort of like in a situation because you were working out of an ideology and what you believed, and so that gave you a conceptuality through which to understand things.
Yeah.
But what happened was sort of like what Kant said about butchers and why they should not serve on juries, because they've gone through an experience that's distanced themselves from the experience of suffering.
Yeah, you need a little cognitive distance.
And so, we all have a conception that separates us from the reality of suffering. So you take everybody who supported the Bush administration, and the means are necessary to achieve the ends, and everybody is supportive of this. Well, you take them to Guantanamo Bay, you have them explain, well, we just swept these people up. We don't really know if they did anything or not. So let's all watch them be tortured. And then humans would be flooded most humans would be flooded with compassion. And that overwhelms the conceptuality, which is exactly where Buddhism is coming from. You should not embrace any conceptuality that minimizes suffering. Everything has to start with the reality of human suffering.
That's interesting.
Life suffering, any form of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a kind of trying to put all the puzzle pieces together, and could I? And I was perfectly willing to give them up if I needed to, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Everything in social psychology says I really wasn't, but I at least felt that way about it at the time, right? And it just so happened that the thing that did it, so I came to graduate school. That was exactly the state I was in graduate school, right? And I began to look at John Stuart Mill, particularly this amazing passage in On Liberty. This is sort of a kind of philosophical conversion, I guess you could say, or at least a political conversion. I read this passage in John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. It's at the end of Essay 4, where he talks about the Mormons. And he says, and I can quote it, he said, nobody has more disapprobation for Mormonism than I do.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I consider it a riveting of chains on one half of the population, meaning the female population. Mill was a staunch feminist, right? He said, nevertheless, if our society wants, now I'm paraphrasing, if our society wants to stop them, then they may do so by any fair means, of which silencing their teachers is not one. So you can't silence their teachers. And then he says, if anybody wants to do this, let them send missionaries out to Utah to persuade them, right? And he's envisioning almost an evangelical kind of come out of Mormon, out of this Mormon polygamy, right? And join, liberal society or whatever. And within our own society, he's saying, any fair means of which silence them is not one of them. You cannot silence them. Because if you do that, you lose your justification for why you believe they're wrong. And that's a whole nother topic.
But, Mill was able to think beyond the way his age thought about the women question.
Yeah.
Not only because he was able to see what women are capable of, but he also understood deeply what women suffer.
Because Harriet Taylor helped him do that.
Because of, the way the standards and the rules at the time.
Yeah. And for me, this was a kind of philosophical political conversion. I said, I was interested in political philosophy, but at that moment I realized whatever kind of society I want, if I were the Mormons in that situation, I would want everybody to be like Mill. Mm-hmm. That's what I would want. Send your missionaries. And try to convince me. I mean, even the leader of the Mormon Church at the time said, absolutely, convince us, and we'll be grateful.
Better than getting lynched in Illinois.
And if I'm in their society, if I'm in the out group, if I'm running around in this liberal society, which is a whole bunch of in groups, then don't silence me. If I was ever in the out group, that's the way I would want to be treated. And from that point on, every bit of my work in moral philosophy was built layer by layer upon that idea of moral tolerance, persuasion, all of that sort of stuff. And that's where my dissertation was a defense of Mill's free speech.
We've been talking for about an hour and 15, largely about religion.
Hey, not a class time.
And if anybody actually ever listens to this, we owe them a debt of gratitude.
Well, I was going to say,
I think we need to get money, take up money for therapy, but okay.
Well, I was going to say, it might be a good point to transition to, since we've been talking about what is religion and what are its implications, or what is the common good. And I think so much of, at least from the past few moments, we've been talking about communities, and that if I was going to make any sort of definition of the common good, it would have to be values that are shared by a community. But let's not forget the individual either. So,
Right. An interesting. This will likely be the subject of a future episode. One of the questions we got in the debate was, well, it wasn't a question. It was, the common good doesn't exist. Blah, blah, blah. And so arguing for that is really important. But I would say that there's there is something that we're striving for, but there is also a reality of we're not just talking about human societies. We're talking about any kind of society. A wolf pack has a common good. And if that wolf pack is not vigorous enough, and if their hierarchy isn't stable enough, and so on, and it's going to fall apart. Stromatolite layers, right? Blue-green algae. You've got layers that are anaerobic. You've got layers that are aerobic. So the ones that are synthesizing oxygen are helping out the ones and supplying nutrients to the types of blue-green algae that are not.
So various forms of common good, not just anthropocentric forms.
Right. We're talking about something much wider than merely human societies, even though human societies are the center of the analysis and more complex, of course, than wolf packs and stromatolite layers.
This will illustrate our theme, why everybody hates moral and political philosophers. I'll throw political philosophers in there. They might be slightly more annoying than moral philosophers. Here's the definition of the common good from the Standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy. In ordinary political discourse, the common good refers to those facilities, whether material, cultural, or institutional, that members of a community provide to all members in order to fulfill a relational obligation they all have to care for certain interests they have in common. That is the most ham-fisted...
Yeah, that's a hell of a definition, isn't it?
It's just awful. Right?
That's awful. That is awful.
It's just awful.
Only an academic could come up with something.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Only an academic philosopher would come up with a definition like that.
And what's scary is that was probably the work of many hands. Or is there only a single author?
No, they're single authors.
Okay.
I'm not going to say who it is.
All right. No, very, very diplomatic of you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we need a little, I think, an earthier, if not definition, an earthier understanding of the common good. And the way I kind of wrap it into like the interaction between religion and the common good, rightly or wrongly, I appreciate your pushback, is basically saying, look, whether hypocritical or sincere, whether foolish or wise, our invocation of a higher power has political consequences. It can stir human hearts and provoke action in all sorts of different directions, right? Sometimes it rallies people, kind of like iron filings to a magnet, in defense of one's homeland, for example, or towards a cause that we might view as malignant or as just. And sometimes it spurs people to revolt against a corrupt society. Right? This is a big part of religious movements as well. So it can inspire us to berserk attack. It can dampen our passions and prejudices. It can enslave us. It can also give us meaning and purpose. Like there are these multivalent ways in which religion manifests. And I talked a lot about the tensions between palace and temple as kind of a primitive endocrine system of human societies, kind of like paired hormones checking and balancing each other.
And this is one of the things that Rob brought up in the debate, and I wish I could do it justice to what he said because it was passionate. And I occasionally love to see you be as passionate as you were on that night.
That was jet lag, actually.
That was jet lag. Oh, that's what that was. Yeah. He brought up something that I wrote down in my notes. That says, why is religion such a catalyst for strong emotion, either to justice or to violence? Right?
And can't justice and violence sometimes go
certainly. Yeah, absolutely. That's where J. Matt and I got into this whole discussion about the Russian Revolution versus the American Revolution and all that sort of stuff. Why is it such a catalyst? And I think I don't know, this is an ill-formed thought, so it might need to be aborted, but it has something to do with the way that we use reason in groups. That's what makes a religious belief or a religious like a full-fledged religion a catalyst for like inspiring people to either blow up the Twin Towers or feed India. Feed the poorest in India or whatever. Sure. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, I wonder if that's something about it. That's that binding and blinding that Jonathan Haidt talks about, right? And I think you have to have both, because I don't think religious practice will inspire that kind of catalyst, and I don't think just religious belief will inspire that kind of catalyst. You have to have both of them.
You mean both belief and practice?
But then again, just like that, Heidegger could be right. No, I'm kidding.
Well, look at those who would say, including many atheists, well, I have no beliefs. So, I mean, I see what you're saying.
Which respectfully is just BS.
Right. It's still...
Am I right?
To believe in a negative is still a belief. But there are plenty of religions outside the Western context, and even within the Western context, that don't place that much emphasis on belief. Here again, we can talk about socialization.
Yeah.
Like, I I loved the film Syriana for this reason. Have you ever seen Syriana? It's kind of a George Clooney, Matt Damon. There are several others in it, but it
I think it was a combination of Matt Damon and George Clooney that made me go. No.
Surprising? No. It's
like I take one or the other, but like
it's quite a good movie. In part because it's not a real. Neither character plays their usual kind of typecast selves, and in any case, the main thing that I like about this is it follows the trajectory of a guy, just an ordinary young Muslim man, who gets radicalized and ends up becoming a suicide bomber.
Yeah.
So sure, we can't exclude belief, but the socialization, the ways in which here you are kind of an outcast, here you are kind of in this case, a Pakistani who was working as a casual laborer in the Gulf, gets slowly radicalized in some very cynical ways that you can see how his entire worldview kind of goes towards it.
Yeah, there's a great book called My Year Inside Radical Islam.
Oh,
Do you know this book?
What's his name? He was a Brit, right, of South Asian extraction. Yeah, I think a really good book. I'm forgetting the name right now.
Google it. I do know the title's right. My Year Inside Radical Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And the title suggests he spent a year. He was definitely getting radicalized, and he left.
Yeah, this is a really common thing. I try to bring this up with my students in world history in order to try to sometimes we tend to think in the West, whether we call ourselves religious or not, it's kind of this common thing that we have this antipathy for Islam, right? And this is true of a hardcore atheist like Christopher Hitchens, and it is true of the staunchest evangelical Christians supporting Bush and the entire invasion of Iraq. Like, these people will find nothing to agree about except for their kind of antipathy and hatred for Islam.
Yeah.
And I ask my students to imagine, okay, what if, let's say, very, very, very hypothetically, 100, 400 years from now, 500 years from now, let's say that it is now China dominating the world. And the United States is still straggling on. We've still kind of got a democracy, even though it's
But we're definitely a second world country, second world power.
We are a second-rate power at this point. So we must, somehow, we are a second-rate power, and so we must navigate this world. It's not too difficult to imagine that the main political parties will become pro and anti-China. One political party preaching the virtues of accommodation with the greater power. This is what we've got to do. The other party saying, being kind of this recalcitrant, laggard about everything. So the example is, inevitably the pro and anti-China positions will take on, in some way, in some shape, a religious hue, right? So you'll have Christians who are preaching accommodation with the power, kind of like the Roman emperor, right? Kind of like Jews, the Hellenistic Jews.
Yeah, the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Exactly.
And the Essenes.
And then you'll definitely have the hardcore rejectionist types who are, with their Christian doctrine, beginning to preach terrorist violence against the pagan overlords and so forth. And so every religion cycles through its accommodationist and zealot phases, right? Every religion has the capacity, for better and for worse, for whether it a vehicle of social protest and the kind of the vehicle of social control. And we tend to think, oh, well, vehicle of social protest, well, that's a good thing, right? Because, especially if you're protesting against injustice. On the other hand, it's harder for us to see, well, the vehicle of social control is not necessarily all the time 100% negative. This is something that really does contribute to that common good. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
That's more than 2 cents. That's like a whole quarter.
Well, that's what Jonathan was saying. It can contribute to the common good. The passion, the commitment.
Yeah. The book I was thinking of is a fantastic example of how reason and affect and community took somebody from a very, very strong race, Nazism. So the book is called Rising Out of Hatred. I don't know if you know this book.
No.
The author of the book is his father is Don Black, who was the founder of the Daily Stormer and Stormfront.
Oh, yeah, I have heard of this guy. Yeah.
And he went to a university. He was the heir apparent. I mean, he was dubbed by, the Grand High Muckety Muck David Duke himself as the next white like the next white carry on the white nationalist, white pride, sort of thing. And it was the engagement with people that were willing to actually talk to him, willing to have conversations with him, willing to reason with him. And you can watch in that book as their reasons slowly become his reasons. Not all of them, but a lot of them become his reasons. And he becomes further and further alienated from his own father's reasons and that sort of thing. And it's a great book.
Well, and all kinds of people have gone through that evolution, Certainly with racism in this country, and certainly with anti-gay sentiment a generation ago. Our parents and grandparents were not exactly open-minded about this, but this generation is completely different. And thank goodness it is.
Well, we want to start wrapping up there.
I think we can
I
wrap up.
do need to.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Rob,
that was fun.
and I really appreciate your contributions, and Jonathan, thank you.
We should do this again with beers next time.
Yes.
I think, so.
Yeah, they're you guys.